For quite some years in my early 20s, I still liked reading, but I read mostly non-fiction books. So I read a lot about psychology and spirituality and trauma and philosophy and whatnot. But it wasn't until these three books came along that I really started to value fiction again. Because before that, I was of the opinion that there's not really a point in reading a story that has never actually happened. But yeah, these books convinced me otherwise. They might convince you too, if you feel like you're in a bit of a slump with your reading, or you find it a bit difficult to sit through an entire book or something. These might be perfect for you. So the first book I want to talk about is technically three books, because it's a trilogy by Tove Ditlevsen. She's a Danish author, and this is her autobiography. I think you would technically call this autobiographical fiction. It's called Childhood, Youth, and Dependency, or Dependence, I think. And she talks about her own life and what it was like to grow up in the 1920s in Copenhagen, in a family that wasn't very rich, and she always wanted to be a writer. And it wasn't very usual back then for girls to be writers. It was seen as something unattainable, basically. So the things she had to hear and had to go through in order to pursue writing are really remarkable. I think if you are a writer or an aspiring writing, or you would like to have a little bit of a behind the scenes look what goes into actually writing a book, or making writing your real profession, I think this might be perfect. It's so raw and vulnerably written, and I don't know what this book did to me, but it just had me in its grasp immediately. It's basically her entire life in three little volumes, and especially the last one is quite incredible, because she has many flaws. She's not perfect by any means. She gets into situations with men, into relationships with men that are very unhealthy. I know her first husband she just married because he was a publisher, basically, so she could get some of her poems published. She was also addicted to drugs, to different drugs, quite severely addicted, and it was life-threatening at many points. She had children from different men when she was a drug addict, so this is really intense to read. There's scenes where she's in rehab and she's describing what she feels. It's I don't know, it's so dark and bleak. These books equally make me lose faith in humanity and give me hope. It's very strange. Yeah, a little bit later I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which is like such a classic, and I have to honestly say this is very similar, but I find Tove Ditlevsen a lot better. So, I have the German editions here from the Aufbau Verlag. It's a great translation if you want to read in German. But I think I saw that there's an English version for like 10 euros for all three of them together. I'll read you a little quote so you get a bit of a taster. The last thing I would say is, don't spoil yourself with reading about her life up front. I would say just let those books speak for themselves. I made the mistake, I watched like a documentary of hers that is on YouTube after I read the books, and the documentary kind of ruined a lot of things for me. I think they portrayed her in a really strange, degrading way. And yeah, I honestly wish I wouldn't have watched it. So I would just let the books speak for themselves, right? It's still fiction. We don't know what really happened and to what extent, but it's her view on things, and that is valuable. And it's such a world you get thrown into. Super interesting also, like socially, how those times have been in the 20s, and many cool insights. So yeah, I'll read you a little quote from, I think it's in the first chapter of Childhood, the first part of the trilogy. This is from when she's enrolling to go to school. When we enter the building, which seems completely empty, a sharp smell strikes my nose. I recognize it and my heart stiffens, because it's the already well-known smell of fear. My mother notices it, too, because she releases my hand as we go up the stairs. In the principal's office, we're received by a woman who looks like a witch, her greenish hair perches like a bird's nest on top of her head. She only has glasses for one eye, so I guess the other lens was broken. It seems to me that she has no lips, their breasts so tightly together, and over them a big porous nose juts out, its tip glowing red. She says without introduction. So your name is Tove? Yes, says my mother, to whom she hardly cast a glance, let alone offered a chair. And she can read and write without mistakes. The woman gives me a look as if I were something she had found under a rock. That's too bad, she says coldly. We have our own method for teaching them to children, you know. The blush of shame floods my cheeks, as always when I've been the cause of my mother's suffering insult. Gone is my pride, destroyed is my short-lived joy of being unique. My mother moves a little bit away from me and says faintly, she learned it by herself, it's not our fault. I look up at her and understand many things at once. She's smaller than other adult women, younger than other mothers, and there is a world outside my street that she fears. And whenever we fear it together, she will stab me in the back. As we stand there in front of the witch, I also notice that my mother's hands smell of dish soap. I despise that smell. And as we leave the school again in utter silence, my heart fills with the chaos of anger, sorrow, and compassion that my mother will always awaken in me from that moment on throughout my life. The second book I would like to recommend if you're trying to get back into reading is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm gonna keep this somewhat short because I have a whole video on Frankenstein, so you can check that out if you're more interested. But, you know, just to sum it up, Frankenstein is about a scientist, Dr. Frankenstein, who tries to create a human by sewing together parts of corpses and bringing them alive. And he succeeds. And I think if you're in a bit of a reading slump, this is such a great book to read because it's so clear and crisp. Mary Shelley's writing is amazing. I can easily just see everything that she says in front of me so vividly. It's effortless to read in that way. We just talked in uni about what it means when something is effortless to read, right? And that doesn't mean that it's effortless to write, but that feeling of not having to exude any effort to keep going, that's really what I get from Frankenstein. And it covers so many thought-provoking topics on what it means to create things, responsibility, trauma. It's a truly wonderful read. It's quite, you know, it's easy enough to read, but it has beautiful language in it. I love this book. It, you know, the story of Frankenstein just doesn't leave me anymore since I first read it. An absolute masterpiece, a classic. that it most deserves its status. And you know, if you're into the whole it's October and Halloween thing, then I guess this will be perfect right now. I can pretty much promise that you'll have a good time reading this book. I will read you a little quote before we move on. I cannot describe to you my sensations on the near prospect of my undertaking. It is impossible to communicate to you a conception of the terrible sensation, half pleasure and half fearful, with which I am preparing to depart. I'm going to unexplored regions, to the land of mist and snow, but I shall kill no albatross. Therefore do not be alarmed for my safety, or if I should come back to you as worn and woeful as the ancient Marnier. You will smile at my allusions, but I will disclose a secret. I have often attributed my attachment to, my passionate enthusiasm for, the dangerous mysteries of ocean, to that production of the most imaginative of modern poets. There is something at work in my soul which I do not understand. I am practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labor. But besides this, there is a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, intertwined in all my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I am about to explore. Okay, the last book I want to talk about, I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend, so I'm not responsible for what happens to you when you read this book, but this is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. You might have heard about the controversy around this book. It's a relatively recent book. I think it was written in 2015. Yeah, it was written in 2015. And it's about 4 friends that live in New York, and we basically hear about their entire life history and how they evolve as friends, but also in their careers and their love lives. Hanya Yanagihara is an amazing author. I have so much respect for her. She said what she wanted to try in this book was she wanted to see what happens when you write a character that just doesn't get better, right? Because we're used to this kind of arc and things going up or becoming good for a character, and she wanted to see what happens when you kind of take that hope away, if you could still make it a compelling story. So needless to say, this is really quite... So needless to say, there is a lot of horrible things happening in this book. So, you know, if you're in a place in your life where you're not very emotionally stable, I really would not recommend reading this book. This is no joke, but it has really quite upset me for several weeks and months after reading it, and same with Eric. He's still mad at me that I recommended it to him. But it is such an interesting study on trauma. I've read so many books about trauma, but this one depicts it so well. It's I don't know, like how she writes about the workings of the human psyche is completely beyond me. And Hanya Yanagihara, she's an editor, I think, so she's impeccable at pacing. This is such a well-paced book, you know. It has more than 700 pages, but it really doesn't feel like it. You kind of want it to be longer, and it's just a good experience, you know, when you haven't been reading for a while, to be able to make it through such a big book. But yeah, that being said, Hanya is a super interesting person. I've watched many interviews with her, but I would not recommend you do that until after you've read the book, because I actually spoiled myself quite badly before getting into it, and it ruined a lot of the reading experience for me. I'm also gonna say that I'm almost 100% certain this is gonna be a modern classic. It captures the spirit of our time so well. You know, the age of trauma, the age of the self-made man and being ambitious and building your tribe around you. I'm sure this book is going to stick around, and it doesn't leave anyone without an opinion. Everyone has an opinion about it. People are incredibly mad about what she has written about in this book. So again, there's like trigger warning lists online. Maybe look through them, you know, if you're sensitive to I don't know, harming yourself, suicide, cutting, domestic violence, anything like that, then you probably shouldn't read this book. So again, I'm not responsible for what happens to you when you do, but if you can take it, the writing is quite exquisite. I would really like to have the American cover of this book, because I'm gonna just put it on the screen. But I think, yeah, it I don't know, it just sums up the book in one picture. It's so perfect. And originally, actually, I heard that on a podcast. The cover was supposed to be a photograph by, I didn't write down his name, by a man. I'm gonna put his name on the screen. And he took that photograph after an Emily Dickinson poem, I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died. Yeah, I think that would have been an amazing cover as well. Perfect. Just thought that was a lovely detail. Yeah, but I'm gonna go ahead and read you a quote. These characters still live in my head. Like, I cannot believe that they're not real, because to me they're more real than most people I've ever met, and that just attests to amazing writing. So here we have Harold talking about what it is like to lose a child. And let me tell you 2 other things I learned. The first is that it doesn't matter how old that child is, or when or how he became yours. Once you decide to think of someone as your child, something changes. And everything you have previously enjoyed about them, everything you have previously felt for them, is preceded first by that fear. It's not biological, it's something extra biological, less a determination to ensure the survival of one's genetic code, and more a desire to prove oneself inviolable to the universe's feats and challenges, to triumph over the things that want to destroy what's yours. The second thing is, when your child dies, you feel everything you'd expect to feel. Feelings so well documented by so many others that I won't even bother to list them here. Expect to say that everything that's written about mourning is all the same, and it's all the same for a reason, because there's no real deviation from the text. Sometimes you feel more of one thing and less of another, and sometimes you feel them out of order, and sometimes you feel them for a longer time or a shorter time, but the sensations are always the same. But here's what no one says. When it's your child, a part of you, a very tiny but nonetheless unignorable part of you, also feels relief. Because finally, the moment you have been expecting, been dreading, been preparing yourself for since the day you became a parent has come. You tell yourself, it's arrived. Here it is. And after that, you have nothing to fear again.